Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is very exciting for us. It's actually part 4 of a series, Meet the Candidates, that we're doing. Vision is doing in collaboration with a number of organizations, Tribe Tel Aviv, Kerem House, JIC. It's an exciting opportunity for olim from English-speaking countries to hear candidates and understand, who and what they're voting for on election day. One of the things that really motivated me to initiate this was the idea that really, we look at Israeli society often as a collection of tribes, saying radically different things, often espousing radically different visions for what this country should be. And the truth is, from my perspective, they're all right, meaning everybody is saying something true. And I think it's important that we really listen deeply and carefully to everything that Einat says, and understand what it is about her message and the message of the Oz party that's a necessary part of the tapestry of our political conversation, and really think to ourselves, ask ourselves what it has to contribute, to where we are right now in our national story. So with that, I'd like to thank you for coming. Thank you all for coming, and we'll get started. I have a series of questions. The ideal is always that you provide short answers, but you don't have to feel limited to that if you have a long
I'll
answer.
try. I'm not known for my short answers,
Okay.
but I will do my best.
Okay. So to start, I'd like to ask you to share your vision for what kind of country Israel should be. What barriers do you see standing in the way of Israel being the kind of country you'd like it to be? And what do you plan to do in Knesset to overcome those barriers and move Israeli society in the direction you'd like?
And you want a short answer to that?
That one you could answer long.
Okay. Quick background. My name is Einat Wilf. I've been advocating, fighting for about 25 years on issues relating to the rise of anti-Zionism in the West, and to kind of crystallizing the essence of the ideology of the Palestinian Arabs, what have come to call after October 7th Palestinianism. After October 7th, I decided to establish a new political party because I realized that not only was I one of the few people who helped many around the world and in Israel make sense of this moment, as a result, I also had a better understanding of what policies we needed to take and what mistakes we were making in real time. Fundamentally, in terms of understanding, I compare it to, I say that physical tunnels have been dug in Gaza and in southern Lebanon for years, and metaphorical tunnels have been dug under the most hallowed institutions of the West for decades. And that on October 7th, people came out of the physical tunnels and the metaphorical tunnels to launch a global assault on Jewish life. And I think this is how we need to understand this moment. And I think very few people understand it this way, and understand that it's a global assault on Jewish life everywhere and anywhere, carried by both physical and non-physical means. I think I'm one of the few people who really understands the non-physical war. Sometimes when I say it in Gaza in percentage terms, I say 30% of the war was physically in Gaza. And in that war, we were present, we fought, we were brave, we sacrificed. And 70% of the war, I would argue the greater share, was the war for narrative and consciousness that was taking place in people's minds, screens. And for that, I argue we were effectively a no-show. And as a result, we made numerous policy mistakes in the way that we conducted the definition of the war, the enemy, the goals, all that. So what I realized is that I was uniquely positioned. I didn't hear my kind of thinking in any direction, left or right, to kind of both make sense of the moment and to show where we need to go. So I established Oath Party based on 3 principles. I decided not to have a grocery list of all the good things that we want, but to hone in on the 3 things that I think are absolutely necessary. But even those 3 things, if I were to give a super, super short answer, it's just 2 words: grow up. And the argument is that essentially Israel needs to adopt a grown-up, sometimes I call it a sovereign attitude. And the grown-up attitude basically means that we stop running away from core problems. The mature attitude to life, which even grown-ups have difficulty with, is that you identify problems, you don't run away from them, and you address them before they blow up. You take care of your health before the heart attack. You have the difficult conversations in your relationships before it goes sour. And you address problems when you can do it before they blow up. And I think we've been running away from a lot of core problems, adopting both domestically and externally a tendency to essentially pay protection. So buy calm by paying money. So the grown-up attitude on key issues looks like this. The first one, once we understand really the consciousness narrative war, says that Israel's entire defense and foreign policy should be organized around the principle that I call pursue peace, based on Arab embrace of Zionism and dismantling Palestinianism. We can later go into depth, but it basically means that we need a kind of admittedly rare leadership that can embody authentically a positive vision while focusing domestic and international attention on the actual obstacle to the positive vision. That's the first one. The second one, domestically, is called public services and public positions to those who serve the public. And here also the argument is that our problem is not drafting a few thousand Ḥaredi men. Our problem is what constitutes the solidarity of Israeli society. And here the argument is that we need to go back to an understanding that Israel is a society of collective solidarity. All the services that represent collective solidarity, welfare, education, healthcare, depend on people demonstrating collective solidarity. And until we have peace, that means that people need to serve their country. And again, we can go later in depth, but the notion is to create a fully open, inclusive invitation, a coercive invitation for everyone to serve the country. And those
coercive open invitation.
Exactly. It's actually it's not trivial. You know, everyone has to do it, but it means everyone. But they also have to do it. And if they refuse, I compare them to the wicked son in the Haggadah. They basically remove themselves from the collective, and thereby whatever services they will ever need, they will have to pay full price privately. So that's public services and public positions to those who serve the public. And again, it's about a big idea. It's the idea of Israeli solidarity. And the third principle, which is a fancy way of talking about growing up, it says from an exilic mindset to a sovereign conduct. And again, if you're asking, my biggest vision for Israel is a country that really internalizes the fact that we're sovereign here. I feel that even though we're the people of Israel and the land of Israel and the state of Israel, we still tend to revert to a shtetl mentality that expresses a certain unease that also has an impact on our enemies that I think pick up on that sense of unease. And as a result, we run away from core problems such as borders, such as the judicial issues, such as education. One of the things in education is we argue that, a bit like the military, all education systems should be national, Zionist, and in the Hebrew language for everyone. Then you can add stuff, Arabic, Gemara, but the foundation of a grown-up country is that you do not educate people against your country. So this is, so In 2 words, grow up. In 1 word, sovereign.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned this term Palestinianism.
Yes.
Okay, so can you define that a little more?
Yes. So my claim to fame is that over the years, I became known for telling both a personal and an analytical story of having come in the 80s and 90s from the Israeli left, a firm belief that the only thing standing between us and peace is a Palestinian Arab state and the occupation, no settlements, capital in East Jerusalem, all these things. Voted for all Israeli prime ministers who promised to bring us close to that vision. Rabin, Peres, Barak, lived through the failure of the negotiations in Camp David, the suicide bombings and the campaign of massacres of the Second Intifada, and begin to question essentially what do the Palestinians want, because despite repeated offers, they don't seem to want what we thought that they wanted. And I, like so many things, when I begin to ask questions, I tend to research to try to come up with answers that rest on evidence and knowledge. That becomes the book, The War of Return. And I'm ultimately able to encapsulate very clearly that the conflict, remarkably, is actually quite simple. The Jews want a sovereign state in the land of Israel, even a part of it. So the Jews prize sovereignty above all, and the Arabs in the land especially, but more broadly, have as their ultimate goal to secure that the Jews will not have sovereignty. So I become the person who actually goes around saying, look, the conflict is actually quite simple. The Jews want a state. The Arabs want the Jews not to have a state. And I also make the argument that I can easily defend that this is empirical. This is not an opinion. This is actually a description, which, by the way, hundreds of millions of people, billions of people do not deny that description, but they justify it. A lot of people think that indeed the Jews should not have a state, but they don't disagree that that's what the issue is. After October 7th, I began to feel that I need to give a name to that ideology, because I had to make it clear that it's not just about an ethnicity, like for the Palestinians, or a people or a nation, that I need to give a name to the fact that it's something different. It's an ideology of negation, of destruction, that unites millions of people, tragically, in desiring something negative, something destructive, rather than something constructive. And then after October 7th, I decided to give it a word, and the word is Palestinianism. Palestinianism is the name I gave to the ideology that prioritizes the destruction of the Jewish state over building something for themselves.
Okay, follow-up question.
Sure.
Could you see any validity to the Palestinian struggle? Meaning, just leaving aside for a moment our identity, our connection to the land, and the things they say about us. Do you feel capable of looking at the last 100+ years through the eyes of Palestinians, experiencing Zionism in the state of Israel in the way that they have? And could one make the claim that of course, if the only Jewish state they've ever experienced is an oppressive state that looks to them like a settler colony from Europe, maybe they're justified in resisting it by any means necessary?
So this is an ex post facto description that does not fit what we see in real time. Now, am I capable of understanding how it was built? Absolutely. I describe it. But at one point, it loses, I would argue fairly early, it lost whatever justification. Because the justification is I'm always wary of parallels, but you can have a discussion. Can you empathize with white slave owners not appreciating abolition? You can understand it, you can explain, but at one point, you lose the ability to justify it. So, when I explain the conflict and I say the Jews want a state, the Arabs want the Jews not to have a state, and then people sometimes ask the obvious follow-up question, but why? Why are they willing to devote so much effort and sacrifice to the Jews not having a state? And all the explanations that we give ex post facto, oppression, displacement, all this, but none of them exist when that ideology is already formulated. Another thing that I became well known for is a quote that I've been using in all my talks about this conflict by Ernest Bevin, the British foreign minister after World War II. And Bevin goes to the British Parliament in February 47 to explain why Britain failed. A lot of people don't understand. Britain failed to fulfill the terms of the mandate that it was unanimously entrusted with to help the Jews achieve self-determination in the land. And he explains the failure. He says His Majesty's government is faced with an irreconcilable conflict. Now, this is February 47. In February 47, he calls it irreconcilable. And he goes on to explain. He says, the Jews and Arabs in the land, obviously no one's yet called a Palestinian. He says, for the Jews, the top priority is to establish a sovereign Jewish state. And he says, and for the Arabs in the land, the top priority is to resist to the last. We still have that word resistance, right? Mukawama. Resist to the last, not to the middle, to the last, the establishment of Jewish sovereignty in any part of the land. Now, why do I use that quote so much? In addition to its brilliant simplicity, in February 47, all the ex post facto excuses don't exist. There are no settlements. There's no oppression. There's no displacement. Everyone is in place. There's no Bibi. There's no Ben Gvir Smotrich. Have you noticed how the names abroad are always said Ben Gvir Smotrich? There's none of that. There's no settlements. There's no occupation. So it's a moment when you can actually really focus on the core of the conflict. And one of the ways in which the conflict is often mistold is reversal of cause and effect. And what you described is often a way where people do that. Like, oh, they talk about the occupation, but those are the things that happened because they went to a stupid moronic war for the goal of no Jewish state. Displacement was because they declared that it's more important that the Jews have nothing than that the Arabs have one more state. So, but even before that, so people will say, okay, so why do they oppose it in February 47 before there are any of those excuses? And here you have to go to Arab sociology, Islamic theology, where Arabs and Muslims for more than a millennia, since the 7th century conquests, have only known weak, displaced, dhimmi, meek Jews. And as far as they're concerned, this is the cosmic order, where Jews are lower. That's why I use the racial sap. And then, what does Zionism do? Zionism makes the radical claim that Jews are equal. They are equal as a collective. That is, they have the equal right to self-determination, and they are equal as individuals. That is a radical claim that has historically been met with violence when groups who were deemed lower were demanded equality. But I can't empathize, I can understand why people violently respond to a sense that the hierarchical order that they were born into is being upended. But at one point, I'm certainly not sympathetic to it.
Okay. you mentioned Ernest Bevin,
Yes.
and you seem to be a student of history. I'm just curious personally, the extent to which you would say the British are responsible for creating or exacerbating tensions between Jews and Palestinians here, and to what extent did the British, especially the Foreign Office under Bevin, try to thwart the conditions of the mandate, try to prevent the Jewish state from coming about?
Ultimately, my claim against the British, and it was the claim in real time, that they betrayed a sacred trust. Meaning, people have the bizarre notion that Israel was created thanks to the Holocaust, so that never again. But I always tell people, Herzl was a visionary genius, and because he imagined a Jewish state so that never at all. That was his genius. And in that sense, he would probably mourn that the Jewish state was, even though everything was ready, was not established in time. Because more than a century ago, I always love to quote people the mandate for Palestine. Because more than a century ago, the word Palestine was associated, if anything, with Jewish self-determination. And the mandate for Palestine, which was unanimously voted on by the League of Nations, said that recognizing the historic connection of the Jewish people with Palestine is the grounds for reconstituting their homeland. So more than a century ago, the world could unanimously and without any debate pass a unanimous resolution by the body that represented the world at the time that recognized that the Jews, no less than the Turks, the Kurds, the Armenians, and the Arabs, have a right to self-determination in a piece of the lands of the Ottoman Empire. I always like to mention also that if the Jews had received their fair share of the lands of the Ottoman Empire based on their proportion, Israel would have been 6 times the size. Now, the Arabs respond violently to the idea of Jewish self-determination, just like the Kurds respond to, just like the Turks respond to the Armenian and Kurdish, with much greater success than the Arabs. But the Arabs do have success. The Arabs, because of their overwhelming numbers and British interests, lead the British to fully betray the terms of the mandate. I think it's not sufficiently acknowledged how the combination of Arab violence in the 30s and British betrayal contribute massively to the scale of the Holocaust. Because the Jewish state was ready. The Jewish state was ready to absorb people. But by the British denying Jewish self-determination, caving into Arab violence, closing the gates of the embryonic Jewish state, the scale of the Holocaust was much larger because people had nowhere to flee. So if the British carry a responsibility, is actually for betraying the sacred trust of the mandate.
All right, and you clearly see that as the British caving into Arab demands,
of course,
and not British imperial interests.
Well, it was the same thing. Because of the Arab numbers, British imperial interests meant that in their world, they need to cave to Arab demands in order to protect interests.
The Suez Canal or the oil they were piping from northern Iraq to Haifa, or just the prestige of ruling Jerusalem, things of that nature.
Oh, in that sense, less so.
The British wanted to stay.
No, it's much more about, they assumed that the mandate would be for centuries. You can see it in real time. They didn't think it was going to be a 20-year thing. But broadly, yeah, the Arabs, and even supported by Muslims, had the overwhelming numbers, and for the British, that was more important.
All right, so I'd like to move on to the Ḥaredi issue,
yes,
which you touched upon, not just about drafting Ḥaredim, but really about more broadly integrating Ḥaredim
yes.
into Israeli society. I guess my question is, to what extent do you think Israeli society, the fundamental essence of Israeli society, would change either either as an incentive for Haredim to integrate or as the result of them having integrated?
The opportunity is massive. I look at it as a new potential aliyah, because once the state of Israel really, so our proposal very simply says the following: all people at the right age receive a draft notice. All, and when I say all, it's all: women, men, Jews of all kinds, Arabs. They are all tasked with coming to the Bakum, the induction center. They go through klita, which means they enter under the military umbrella, military law. They are in uniform. I love the English word, uniform. They all get their profile, their level of security clearance, their intellectual, emotional abilities. Today, the army gives a profile to half the country. It will give now to everyone. So everyone's invited in. The state of Israel does not tell anyone that they're not invited. So in that sense, it's a fully, completely open invitation to all the citizens to take part in serving the country. Once they are inducted, once they have completed klita, then you go up and for the miyun, for the sorting, you basically sort them to all the missions, from military service to education, healthcare, agriculture, but you do it as an individual basis, not as a sector. The idea is to end any notion that the country works through middlemen, that anyone is kind of serves as an institutional or middleman between the citizens and the country. So everyone comes to the army as an individual, not as a sector, and they are placed as an individual. It means two things. From that moment on, the entire world of ptorim is gone. There's no need to give anyone a dismissal, a ptor, because everyone can do something. And also, there's no need for the army to trip over itself to suit itself for a certain way of life. Here, I'm very much with Ben Gurion, basic Shabbat, basic kashrut, that's it. And then it becomes individual. So my favorite example is I say, okay, if there's a Ḥaredi man whose profile shows that if they're going to see a woman 3 kilometers radius, they'll suffer a nervous breakdown, they'll be sorted into picking avocados. If there's a Ḥaredi man who's perfectly capable of sitting next to a woman, many of them sat next to me in the Knesset, seem to be perfectly capable of doing that and not suffering nervous breakdowns, he can do a more meaningful service, but it's not as a sector. It's not through a middleman. They are sorted individually. And again, if they refuse, they remove themselves from all the benefits of the country, and to the extent that they need any service, they will have to pay the complete, highest, unsubsidized, full cost fee. And we actually went in depth to look into that. Most of the value of the services are in a person's 20s, which means that let's say someone makes the mistake of refusing to serve when they're 18, and then after 4 years they discover that their life is going to be a nightmare, then they can fix it. They can, at the age of 22, serve. So you have the opportunity to correct your ways. Now, I think what we will see is a division where I think a minority, ultimately, a minority of Haredis will join the Satmars, essentially. They will put the walls even higher. They will do something which I can respect, which will say, we want nothing from the Zionist state and we will give nothing. That I can respect, but ultimately, when you are not enjoying the benevolence of the Zionist state, you can only sustain a very small community. And the rest will become Israelis. Working, serving, whether they're Haredi, I think is not an interest of the country. Whether they are or not Haredi is not of the interest.
It could be I was unclear about the question. Let's say that between the river and the sea,
yes,
the Haredi community is arguably the fastest growing community. Right?
Mm-hmm.
The question really is, to what extent do you think the nature of Israeli society, the character of Israeli society might change as a result of that large and that fastly growing a population integrating into Israeli society.
But again, they're only fast growing because the Zionist state incentivizes that growth. Once you create the public services and public positions, it means you cannot be a dayan, you cannot be a mashgiach kashrut, you cannot have any of those publicly funded jobs.
You think they'll have less children?
Some of it might happen, but again, it's not something that the state incentivizes, or it becomes like all Israelis. And we know that Haredi, before all the guardrails were let loose under the Begin governments and ever since, they tended to have smaller families, they tended to work, they tended to even serve in the army and pay, work, have general education and pay taxes. You can be a Haredi and do all of those things. The way of life that we call today Haredi is an Israeli format from the 1980s. It's not tradition, it's not Torah, it's not Gemara. It's a perverse incentive system that has existed from the 1980s. Once you remove that perverse incentive system, you actually have a great population that will essentially immigrate to Israel. Like all great immigrations, it will change and transform Israeli society, but it will be an immigration that I think will actually be massively productive, because once they start studying, working in higher paying jobs with better education, paying taxes, Israel will run forward.
So I guess another way of putting it, are there any sociocultural concessions you would consider making to the public space, either to incentivize Ḥaredim to integrate or accept as a result of them having integrated?
The only thing we need to do is stop the perverse incentives. That's it. Like, I've actually just spent 4 weeks, every week, 2 days with a group learning in depth the entire Haredi situation in Israel. Once you understand just the vastness of what Israel has created, the perverse incentives that really make a certain way of life possible that is not self-sustaining in any way, shape, or form, and that also the incentives are for middlemen to ensure that this way of life is closed and only works with the Israeli state through middlemen, you understand that if you cut the middlemen, you remove the perverse incentives. That's it. That's all you have to do. The notion, I'm all in favor of having like a sal klita to help people integrate into Israeli society and to understand what it means to be an Israeli. But
they would change the nature of what it means to be an Israeli.
In what sense?
Well, we don't know yet. They haven't integrated.
Probably. Right. Again, every aliyah changed what Israel is. But ultimately, the understanding was that they left the old world behind and they made aliyah to Israel.
Yeah, on this issue, I happen to think, and I don't disagree with a lot of your points, but I happen to think that the main barrier for the Haredim really integrating and really contributing to Israeli society is their perception, and I think some of it is self-serving, but their perception that this is not an authentic Jewish state. This is like a fake Jewish state. And the more authentically Jewish they experience the state as, I think the more they'll ultimately integrate. Certainly some of them.
No, there's actually zero evidence for that. Again, that's part of me now having knowledge of all the data. There's zero evidence to that. All the evidence is that everything is in order to maintain the perverse incentive system and the middleman.
I'll tell you a secret, because I served in Netzach.
Yeah.
And which was a unit that was really created for Ḥaredim, although to be fair, my draft was during the Second Intifada, and it was mostly mitachlim and national religious and some Chabad and Breslov. But one thing I notice about Haredim when they do enter Israeli society, either through the army or through the workforce or whatever else, in most cases, Haredim, when they enter Israeli society, become what we can call Kahanistim. Because Kahanism is really, at the end of the day, Haredi Torah with nationalism. So I just think it's important to be aware of the potential, I don't know if I want to say dangers or just the outcome of, sometimes we should be careful what we wish for in terms of forcibly or maybe coercively, however you want to put it, integrating this population into Israeli society, because my assumption is if they were to successfully integrate this population, which is again the fastest growing population in the country, arguably, I think so. You might have different numbers. That's future Kahanistim, and I think the best maybe anecdotal evidence for that is the fact that the Haredi population keeps growing from election to election, but I don't see Gimel, I don't see the Ashkenazi Haredi party growing from election to election, and I suspect a lot of those voters are going to Ben Gvir. I suspect a lot of Ben Gvir's voters are actually the younger generation of Haredi males.
That's certainly part of it. And I can tell you, one of the speakers we heard, a Haredi woman, spoke about how much of the teaching in Haredi society is hierarchical, to be gentle, and that moving too quickly to Israeli society may exacerbate those elements. But again, when I speak about entering the military, sometimes people, and again, I also spoke about education, that Israel will not enable and will not fund any kind of schooling and education that is not mamlachti, Zioni, Basafa Ivrit, because that's also part of it. But, sometimes people charge me with trying to revive Ben Gurion's notion of the military as a nation building and a collective building mechanism. And it's a charge that I accept with love. Absolutely. And I'm just expanding the boundaries of who's included in the process of building the collective.
So when you're saying that when Haredim express the concern that they want to draft us, to change our culture, to change our identity, you're saying that's correct?
I'm saying that the military has no commitment to anyone not to change them. One of the things that I'm horrified by is the bizarre notion that the military accepted a commitment. This is why I oppose any specialized units, that you enter Haredi, you exit Haredi. And as a member of Knesset, I was privy to, again, all the ridiculousness that went into that. And I'm like, I'm sorry, the military doesn't even promise that you enter alive and you exit alive. The idea that the military will promise to one group above others that they will enter at a time that everyone gets transformed in their life and they will remain unchanged is, I think, a commitment that the military owes no one. So I'm not trying to change or not change. I'm just saying this is expected of everyone. You do this and you are whoever you are. But
okay, so what about my tribe? I come from the national religious sector. We've spent roughly 50 years doing everything we can to build as many Jewish communities in Yehuda, Shomron, Aza, the Golan, East Jerusalem, to resist the partition of the land, to make it impossible for people to move us and cut the land in half. Where do we fit into your vision for the country?
You're asking specifically on the issue of the land,
not just the land and the people who see it as sacred and ours and something we need to fight, kill and die to protect.
So here my view is one that says part of growing up and having a sovereign mindset is that we need to actually decide what is ours, and if it's ours, act like it, and if it's not, also act like it. My argument is that right now Gaza is less relevant, but we can talk about that too. But in the territories in Yehuda v'Shomron, my argument is that what ails us is the fact that we maintain there what I call twilight sovereignty or fudged sovereignty. In Hebrew, I call it amimut ribonit. And I argue that this actually bleeds into Israel, into the Galilee, into the Negev, because if you maintain areas where you're not clear, is this Israel? Is this not Israel? My argument is that this is something that ultimately impacts the entire country. So here, this is an opinion, not empirical. What I do say is empirical is that we by now have enough evidence to show that Israel has right-wing governments, left-wing governments, built settlements, remove settlements, occupies territory, gets out of territory. The impact of all of those Israeli actions on the ideology that I've come to call Palestinianism is a big fat zero. What does impact are bigger things, fall of the Soviet Union, the sense of being isolated. These are the things that you can see have impact. But these Israeli actions that we spent so much political capital fighting over on the issue of our enemies' ideologies have zero impact.
You don't think living under a military bureaucracy while having no ability to influence it doesn't impact the way Palestinians see us?
It doesn't change their commitment to the non-existence of a Jewish state. I'm very precise about what the core issue is. Will an individual be more angry, more annoyed, more that, more prone to violence?
But you're saying the oppression they experience has nothing to do with their determination to destroy the state of Israel.
Exactly.
That's your position.
Yes. And again, it's not a position. It's actually, you can empirically demonstrate it. What impacts is the billions that go into education, that's on the perverse incentive side, on the side of like being isolated. Those are the things that have impact. So once you understand that, I have colleagues, for example, on the left who say, okay, Einat, even if I grant that you're saying this is the conflict, the Jews want a state, the Arabs want the Jews not to have a state, we still need to leave an area where they can hope for a state or not build settlements. I have colleagues on the right who say, no, only if we build and they understand that we're connected and it's ours, they'll understand that we're going nowhere. And I'm like, I hated to break it to both of you, makes no difference. So once you understand that, you can focus the capital and say, okay, then the issue of the territories becomes a question about what we care about in Israel.
And what we want.
What we want. And here I move from the empirical area to opinion. And here I have an opinion. And I admit it's an opinion. People can have other opinions. My opinion is that this twilight fudged sovereignty is a disaster. And that
it's probably very confusing to Palestinians.
And that's also part of it, and to the world, and most of all to ourselves. So my argument is that we need clarity. Now, again, I can say that there are people that I know and love who say, no, we don't want clarity. This twilight sovereignty is great.
It works to our benefit.
It works, yeah. I don't want to submit myself to any law. I want the wild, wild west situation. Fine, it's an opinion, it's a claim, but it's one that we can then argue over because we at least understand the core issue. So I think it's a disaster, and therefore my proposal is this. We need to finally decide as adults, as grown-ups, where is Israel? Where's the state of Israel? The historic land of Israel is everywhere. Where is the state of Israel? And
wherever we decide that, we absorb the population and give them rights.
Precisely. So the proposal is this. A new government is established, a new committee is set, bring right-wing people, left-wing people, geologists, geographers, military experts of all kinds, and tell them the following. Israel is going to decide where it will employ the Israeli civic law, what some people call annexation. It will pass in a Knesset vote. We will do it like grown-ups who stand behind the consequences of our decisions. We will try to minimize any diplomatic fallout and all that, but this will have to be in a Knesset vote. The days of Choma and Migdal are over. We don't play games. We don't do underhanded things. Someone recently gave me an example. They said, Smotrich is the guy that builds the second floor and then spends the next 20 years fighting with everyone because they didn't do it according to the rules, and then the floor sometimes gets destroyed because they never established. I'm the person who said, I'm going to go and make sure that we do it properly. It might take more time. It might be a smaller second floor, but it will be stable and there will be clarity and we can live there calmly and with the knowledge that we're living in the sovereign state of Israel. Yes, whoever is brought under the law are equal citizens of the state. So tell us which territories you want to bring in. Probably not all of them.
For me, all of them.
Fine, but all I'm saying is, fine, make your claim, but then you have to convince because it has to pass in a Knesset vote. And again, part for me of growing up and being sovereign is that you have to accept that if the Knesset vote says only 3% of the land or 25%, that's it. You accept it. Again, tomorrow 1 million Jews come from the West and we can do it with another section, fine. But the idea is that you need to convince me as much as I need to convince you through the Knesset. Again, part of my message of growing up, of being sovereign, has to do a bit with the judicial issue, is that we go back to embracing the ideas that we have to convince each other in the Knesset rather than do things without ever asking for the approval of the sovereign body. And the areas that will not be included in Israel, if there are such, my argument is that they have to enter under what I call active military occupation. My argument is that I don't think it's a problem that we have a military presence occupation in the territories. But like so many things, my argument is that we do it halfway. What does it mean? We pay the diplomatic, military, economic prices of our control, but we don't actually control. We do not control the education and we do not control the mosques. And it's worse, we actually outsource them to people who are committed to continuing the war. And as a result, we're stuck in this endless loop. So my argument is that whatever areas we're militarily controlling, we do it like the Americans in Japan, like the Allies in Germany. We work to ensure that the Arabs are educated every single day, bit by bit, away from the obsession to destroy the Jewish state. And the idea is that, yes, sovereignty before settlement. We act like grown-ups.
Like Southern Lebanon for many years.
What?
Like Southern Lebanon for many years. We have a military presence, but no civilian presence. Or Gaza, really. But
yeah, but even, But we didn't, we never made it clear what, now we're being better about making clear what ends our military presence and at least seem to be taking steps to do it. And again, I go back to what I said in the beginning. What we are sorely missing is the kind of leadership that can have a positive vision, authentically embodied, and as a result can do harsh steps. We tend to have leaders who say, like, I don't know, blustery, harsh things, do nothing, because it's really easy to fold leaders who just bluster. And as a result, we pay 3 times. We've perfected the art of paying for people who bluster, do nothing, and then fold. That's how we pay through the roof. And then we have people who have positive visions, but they take no actions that are harsh actions to realize them. The ability to have a sunny, positive vision and then enact the steps to achieve it is what I think we're sorely missing all across our political spectrum.
So one of the criticisms I know many people in our community have about what we call the political center in Israeli society is that, and I'm generalizing obviously, is that we can say that the Israeli right cares about the land but doesn't like Arabs, and the Israeli left doesn't care about the land but cares about Arabs. And again, I'm generalizing, and I know it's not that simple, but what the political center appears to do is take the negatives from both sides. Say, we don't really want the Arabs here, but we don't care about the land either, so maybe we can give up some land to get rid of Arabs. As opposed to what some might consider a healthier center, which takes the positives of both sides and says, this is our land. We've been struggling for thousands of years to come back to her, and now we're here and we're not going anywhere. But there's also another people here, and they're human beings, and they need to be treated like human beings. And maybe we can figure out a way to have a democratic, inclusive Jewish state between the river and the sea, in which non-Jews are pretty happy.
So that I don't know that this is necessarily a description of center. Look, the way I place Oz Party, sometimes I draw this line and I say, okay, this is the Israeli political system. It is one-dimensional, and everyone tries to place it right, left,
Like
center, just a linear, one-dimensional political spectrum. And I was recently in a briefing, and a woman told me, she was like, she just made Aliyah, and she was like, I can't place you. You're not right, you're not left, you're not even center because you're actually saying something. She's like, you're in another dimension. So yeah, if you look at this one line, Oz essentially emerges into the two-dimensional field and creates a new space. I describe it differently. I say, absolutely, we're here, we've struggled to be sovereign in the land of Israel. What's important is to have a unity of the state, the citizens, and the land where everyone is equal. And we can control other territory, but we need to be responsible in controlling it in a way that ends the war, however long the vision is, ends the Arab war against Zionism. And again, if 1 million Jews come and you can bring in more parts of the land and have it, again, a unity of a state, equal citizens with clarity of what's included in the state of Israel, absolutely.
Okay, so you're a great international spokesperson for Zionism, right?
Thank you.
And Zionism, when I say Zionism, I don't mean like Zionism is a synonym for Jewish liberation. I mean Zionism as a very specific Jewish liberation project that began in the late 19th century, that has very specific ideas and thinkers and initiatives and organization, etc. I would make the argument that Zionism succeeded, that we're here. Maybe we can say Zionism succeeded in 1967. Maybe people would say it succeeded in 1948. But Zionism is the movement that brought the Jewish people back to our land, that revived the Hebrew language, that created the infrastructure for a state. Do you see a need today for a new Jewish liberation ideology to maybe accomplish what Zionism just lacks the fuel to reach?
No, because I actually think that we're still living through that revolution.
You still think we're at the Zionist stage of the revolution?
Absolutely. Again, if I would say what is the essence of the Zionist revolution, you described certain acts, Hebrew, being in the land, establishing a state, but they are acts in the service of collective self-mastery, sovereignty, to embody the notion that we are a people in our land long-term. We embody that sense of confidence, security, of being a people who are at their home. We don't embody that yet. We certainly don't convey that. This is why, again, one of our 3 core principles is from an exilic mindset to a sovereign conduct. I think for quite a few years now, we have seen a reversion to this exilic mindset. And the reason is, ironically, maybe not ironically, it is the Jews who came from exile that had no illusions about it, and therefore were able to develop a sovereign and non-exilic mindset. Everybody knows from Herzl's phrases in Basel. He writes in his diary, in Basel, I established the Jewish state. And then he continues, because he wrote it in his diary, if I were to say that out loud today, people would think I'm insane. Everybody thought he was insane anyway. But in 5, and certainly in 50 years, and he was right on the money, people will see that I was right. Now, in all that paragraphs, the sovereign mindset is when he says 5 to 50 years. Because I brought some books here for you. My most recent book, it's called Peace Not Now. It devotes a big part to the sovereign mindset. You're welcome to take a copy when you leave. The only condition of taking a copy is that you read the book.
Oh, so that we vote for you.
No, but that you read the book. And what I described there as the shtetl mindset or the exilic mindset is one where you know that you're not settled. So your time frame is either now or Mashiach. But what the genius of Herzl is, the moment that he's kind of dragging the Jews out of exile into sovereignty is when he says 5 to 50 years, because that's the time frame of a sovereign people who actually know that they can build and think in human life scale. And I think we have reverted for quite some time now to this kind of very bipolar time of like now or Mashiach. This is again why the book is called Peace Not Now. It doesn't say never, but it says we have a vision. And then how do we get there? Through the slow building of things. That's very Zionist. So I think we are far. And ultimately, when does the Zionist revolution end? It ends when the world is comfortable with the idea of Jews in power. Not imaginary, but real power. I wrote a lot on comparing Zionism and feminism. And I say that the day that women in power becomes a non-issue, then you can really call it quits on the feminist revolution. The same with Jews. The day that the world thinks that Jews being sovereign, having power, becomes a non-issue, that's when the revolution is over. Revolutions are never just about what we achieve for ourselves. It's ultimately about transforming society's relation to the fact that we now have real, not imagined, power.
I would argue we have power. We unfortunately haven't yet psychologically caught up to all of Zionism's material achievements, and therefore we don't think of ourselves as having power. We don't behave like we really have power. You mentioned this shtetl mentality, this exilic mentality. To what extent would you say this exilic mentality has characterized our relationship with the United States? To what extent is that a copy?
For quite some time, absolutely. In the book, Peace Not Now, I kind of look at Zionist Israeli history in 3 stages. The first stage is described as building of the capital, building the assets. That's when we really bring our sovereign attitude to building. And it kind of reaches its peak in the mid-70s, when in terms of the assets, everything, we are at a peak. Then, I totally understand, we grow tired. I write in the book that I just became exhausted describing everything the Zionists did. So I could imagine how exhausted people were doing it. And then we begin to do what I call living off the interest. And living off the interest, I describe 4 things. Peace Now, Gush Emunim, the Haredi way of life, they all begin at the same time, and what I call the bear hug with America. Because essentially, America, from its interests, beginning in the late 60s into the 70s, essentially America at one point wakes up and says, oh my God, this rogue nation has developed on the shores of the Mediterranean. They're using Soviet, Czech, French, British weapons to humiliate Soviet-backed armies, Arab armies. If we don't do something about it, this can embroil us in things that we don't want to get into. So from the late 60s, early 70s, America essentially engages in this bear hug with Israel. And we already see it in the impact of the Yom Kippur War. In many ways, they prevent Israel from exercising a preventive act like they did in the Six-Day War and so forth. And from that moment on, I love it when America firsters say, without America, you're nothing. And I like to joke back that ever since America's our ally, we've stopped winning wars. And, Rahm Emanuel's today here. He tweeted a while ago, Israel should be treated like any other country or something like that, or any other ally. And I was like, fabulous. Does it mean that we can finally be allowed to win our wars and not be like, every time there should be kind of pulled back at the last moment? So yes, there's definitely this moment that it also became very comfortable for us to kind of submit ourselves to this bear hug and to put our eggs all in the same basket. And as a result, a lot of muscles became atrophied. The muscle of sophisticated diplomacy. We see it right now, by the way, with Netanyahu and Trump, which I think is the pinnacle of the shtadlan at the Paritz. We no longer exercise this kind of, if you look at what the early Zionists did with nothing, they had nothing, even less than nothing. The sophisticated diplomacy they engage in with the British, with the French, later with the Soviets. I mean, it's insane, with real, remarkable achievements. And then we kind of, all our muscles became a knowing to talk to America, and then knowing to talk to Congress, and then just knowing to talk to one president. We atrophied really important muscles of knowing how to engage in global sophisticated diplomacy, in having our ability to source a lot of weapons, to have an industry that is more independent. We're seeing us understanding that we need to build some of that back. But absolutely, yes, this bear hug with America is one of the impacts of descending back into this exilic mindset.
But I've never voted for Prime Minister Netanyahu, but I suspect that he's been working very quietly and very carefully for years to just increase our independence and create the conditions for an increased independence.
Faith is lovely, no evidence.
No, okay.
I mean, you've mentioned it.
What?
I mean, he's mentioned that he's been doing that. A Republican House representative, I think his name is Hutchinson from Arkansas, said that he came to Israel to talk with Netanyahu, and Netanyahu specifically said he wants to start scaling back Israel's.
Oh, now? Absolutely. After October 7th, for sure. Absolutely.
But
It's
also in 1996, when he addressed Congress, he spoke about getting us off of American aid, but he just didn't gain any political points for it anywhere. So.
Yeah, again, one of the things that I've come to value very little is talking and doing the opposite.
Okay, so let's talk about doing. What would be your plan, or if you don't have a plan, that's okay, but if you have a plan, I'd love to hear it, for increasing our independence from the United States and being able to diversify our diplomatic portfolio?
Okay. So first of all, I think, and we're living through that now. First of all, absolutely. What Netanyahu said about Israel rebuilding its relationship with the United States so that it's based on various other forms of cooperation had to be done much earlier, but at least, literally as the door is closing on us, we're doing it. I actually think that Israel needs to go much further. I think that Israel now, again, if I'm a position of decision making, I would put people to tell them, look, I need you to come up with all the steps that would be valuable anyway, but would prepare Israel for some pretty apocalyptic or catastrophic scenarios. Anything from the ability to live with a smaller, diversify the electric grid to the level of smaller houses so that if anything happens, it's all independent. This is the kind of thing that is good anyway, but will also be good that. The ability, again, to manage water on an independent level, to grow food. Today there's amazing technologies on roofs, on walls. Again, this is something that is good anyway, helps the climate, helps the economy, and also gives you much more independence. I would look into rebuilding even big programs like fighter jets, absolutely, fighter jets, kind of go back to doing these industries. Israel has a lot of knowledge. We've come to think of ourselves as a deindustrialized nation, but there's no reason to limit ourselves to only that kind of thinking, and look for cooperation with different countries, not just in selling. Countries with which we have Switzerland, Singapore, India, UAE, countries that agree that we already have some relations with, but begin to make them into development relationships, joint fighter jet developments, things of the sort.
Would you consider a stronger partnership with the People's Republic of China?
Not at the moment. Not at the moment. It's there was a moment when it appeared that kind of it was possible to live in a world, as long as the world seems to be exacting a very high price for that, I would be very wary.
Okay.
But there are many other Asian nations that are great partners that we should work with. Japan, South Korea, Philippines.
But it's possible that the only way to really break free from the United States would be through this. I'm not saying this is definitely the case. I'm saying it's a possibility. It's an argument.
I'm not saying break free. I'm saying wiggle room. Just more wiggle room. It's even in the
softer language.
What?
Softer language.
Yeah, no, but also I think that softer language matters because even when the Soviet Union was our most important backer, or France, we still had relations with the United States. It's so I'm just talking about greater wiggle room.
Now, to what extent do you think it's fair to say that what happened on October 7th, 2023 was the direct result of the 2005 disengagement from Gaza, or the two-state paradigm more broadly?
No, none of
Not
that.
At all?
It was the direct result, but the absolute direct result of a combination of our addiction to quiet and calm, combined with a complete dismissiveness of the enemy, which has always been the moment,
I remember the debates in Knesset before the disengagement, and there's even a video on YouTube somewhere of a collection of all these ministers in Sharon's government kind of dismissing all of the arguments that leaving Gaza would be dangerous for us, that maybe they'll fire rockets one day. I mean, the truth is the claims of what might happen were really nothing compared to what did happen. So it's hard not to draw a direct line from the disengagement to what happened on October 7th.
The reason I don't do it is because there were, what are we talking about, 18 years in the middle. Those 18 years actually matter. We pretend as if they don't. And again, there's nothing in my mind that is more defeatist, submissive than kind of having almost a deterministic attitude that says we did this and this. No, during those 18 years, not only did we do nothing, that would have been great if we had done nothing. What we did during those 18 years is that we actively supplied our enemy, we dismissed all their plans, and we assumed that they were toddlers who could be pacified with throwing another $1 billion down their throats. So for me, that's what matters. And sometimes people say things like, what did you expect? To go to war in Gaza? There was no kind of support for that. Or someone recently wrote about Lieberman. He said, he was the only tzaddik in Sodom who said that we should have gone to war in Gaza or something. And I'm saying, seriously? That's our only way of thinking? You either go to war in Gaza or you stuff them with billions? That's all we know how to do?
No, we also know how to be sovereign over the territory.
No, but
and
also...
have Jewish communities living there.
No, but then the second Intifada came also, we had communities and all that. And again, that talks about muscles being atrophied. What we miss is the ability to have a defense and security policy that deals with the ideology of our enemies upstream. When I say that Israel's security and defense policy should be around the principle of pursue peace based on Arab embrace of Zionism and dismantling Palestinianism, I'm basically saying this. Israel's very, very limited thinking on defense is downstream. We will deal with things when they reach the door, when they reach the house. That's a bit also why you think about Jewish communities, that you're like, okay, if I'm closer to their house, it's more difficult. But it comes from the same notion of like, I'll deal with the security when it's close to me, when they come to attack me. But I'm saying, go upstream and deal with the upstream ideology. And first, stop dumping waste upstream. Long before you do anything positive, stop dumping waste. So the way
what would you define as waste in this case?
Funding UNRWA, giving Qatar legitimacy as a mediator, essentially thinking that their ideology doesn't matter, allow all the schooling, the mosque. So much waste is dumped upstream, and then we are surprised when we are poisoned downstream. And all we deal with is how to be a little less poisoned downstream while not addressing the upstream. So for me, our defense and security policy first has to go there. Because, sometimes people look at me and they're like, Einat, the views you describe, sometimes people from the right tell me, oh, I knew that, you talk about the realization that this is what the conflict is about. The Jews want a state, the Arabs want the Jews not to have a state. I knew that a long time ago. I'm like, fine. I was in government and in coalition, and if this is what the right wing knows, then you have to explain to me why it does the opposite. Because I have no value in people who tell me they know something and then don't develop the tools, don't exercise the muscles, don't develop the sophistication to actually address that issue. I would argue in many ways it's a greater crime. If you knew that and you still dismissed it, gave billions to that, then your responsibility is much higher than the person who says, no, I genuinely thought that they were minding their own business or that they wanted to take care of their people.
Well, I think the answer to that was actually expressed very well by the late Eitan Haber, who said that when a person becomes prime minister of Israel, they realize that Washington is calling the shots. And a lot of the policies that I think we've gotten ourselves into that have been bad for our security were policies that were pushed on us by the United States.
I'll give you an example. Again, you have lovely faith, but no evidence. I'll give you another example.
I'm just quoting
No. Again, defeatist attitude. I'll give you an example. In 2016, 17, 18, President Trump announces that he's going to defund UNRWA. Okay? Our prime minister happens to be the same prime minister as now. Begs the American president not to defund UNRWA. And when he ultimately realizes that this guy doesn't like anything that is, large caps acronyms, and he's going to defund UNRWA, then we go begging Germany, of all places, to increase funding to UNRWA. And during this government, they've increased from $20 to $200 million.
And why do you think
Yeah.
that is?
Because we are addicted to calm. We have a stupid vision that says, oh, as long as they are in schools, it's good, even though the schools indoctrinate to continue the war against us. We've completely, the muscle of fighting ideology upstream is gone. And we just don't have that toolbox. We so don't have that toolbox that, again, a recent example, totally confirmed by people. Americans come to Israel, sit at the Kempinski Hotel, send a whole delegation. What is Israel's vision for Gaza? Please tell us what you want to see. Israel doesn't even send people. That also goes to the exilic mindset of like, we'll just talk to the Paris, but we won't build a full, our ability.
Well, it could also be that our vision for Gaza is one that we know they won't accept. So we just hope that we'll quietly achieve it when they're not looking. Or we'll create the conditions for that to be the only option.
Then I will argue that this is stupid, because then we live in a world where it says we want these things, we never are going to operate for anything that is in the middle, and then we also don't get the other things. And I think, again, this is it appeals to, I think, a very childish mindset, or a very messianic mindset that, again, says, if we can't get it now, then Messiah. But the sovereign Herzlian mindset that it says, okay, what do we build in a way that can be built? That, I think, is sorely lacking. And I also saw more things. That if you are the people who constantly say no, America folds you very easily. It's very easily to fold you when all you know how to do is say no. But if you come with a positive vision, and that's why all the time I emphasize the remarkable and rare ability of leaders to say, this is the sunny vision. The sunny vision are that in Gaza will live Arabs who want to build for themselves rather than to destroy the Jewish state. That ideology has been a tragedy for them and for us. You need to be able to embody that sense of empathy and tragedy, that it's been a disaster. And to say, that has to go. This ideology, like that of Nazi Germany, that of Imperial Japan, has to go. Nothing positive can be created, whatever your vision is, as long as this ideology persists. And therefore, we are going to go about proposing steps to dismantle that ideology. And that ideology rests on three issues: UNRWA, refugeehood, return. And this is our plan to how we begin to dismantle. No one in Gaza can be registered as a Palestine refugee for anything to be built. Have plans, come with ideas. They have to, in a public ceremony, I take inspiration here from the Americans in Japan, hand over their UNRWA refugee cards. If any of you get a chance to see a movie, it's on YouTube. It was a documentary movie based on our books, The War of Return and October Return, called UNRWA. Once you see the book, once you see the movie, you know what to do, control Zion. It's very clear what your policy needs to be. But we supported that. We lobbied for that. Again, part of a dismissive attitude that refuses to take it seriously.
We thought we would advise quiet.
Yes, but again, all you had to do, when I say that we need to be grown-ups, part of being grown-ups is also to understand that the other side are grown-ups too. And that if they say that they're committed to return and that they're fifth generation refugees, and take them seriously. Don't think that they're toddlers who can be pacified. Like, by treating them seriously, then you can push back against the ideology, and as a result, make sure that we are not as poisoned downstream.
Okay, so before we take questions from the audience, I want to ask one final question.
Sure.
Okay. Given the fact, like when I saw it's hard to remember before October 7th, but the judicial reform protests that erupted throughout Israel, right, the way I understood them were not just about judicial reform, but about the trajectory of Israeli society and what kind of state this is going to be, and et cetera, et cetera. Look, all societies are dynamic, right? We can't expect our society to be a static society. It's very clear to me that the three fastest growing populations in the country are the Ḥaredim, the Palestinians, and the national religious. I don't know how old you think I am, but
the national religious is not. That's empirically not true. It's actually.
I have 9 kids so far, and I'm part.
I know, but you'll be maybe sad to learn that many of them might not remain. Basically, the national religious is not growing. That's absolutely
really
true.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd be fascinated to see
the Arab population within Israel is not growing beyond its proportion, and the Haredim are, but again, only thanks to perverse incentives.
Okay.
Perverse incentives.
Okay, so you're rejecting the assumption behind the question.
I'm rejecting the deterministic assumption.
Okay. So if you were to see that the society is shifting and that there are populations which we refer to, I guess, loosely as second Israel as opposed to first Israel.
They are now second Israel. Second Israel are called
Only Mizrahim?
at least in the definition of what people describe.
I think more broadly speaking, second Israel are all the different groups who feel marginalized in first Israel.
Okay, but that's only your definition. It's not
fine.
Okay.
So let's say not the not non-first Israel.
Okay.
At what point do you think it's appropriate for the more westernized sectors of Israeli society to try to work with the growing sectors or sectors that are becoming more dominant than they were in the past in order to find a way to live in this country together rather than just, threaten to break things or take to the streets?
So my view is that this is what we need to do all the time. I do a lot of work on democracy. I've written a lot about it with my colleague, Dr. Shimi Moore. We put a proposal that became the proposal of Oz Party that is, again, part of the sovereignty agenda that says that rather than the arm wrestling that took place between the executive and the judiciary, both the executive and the judiciary need to give back powers that they've usurped from the one body that represents the people in Israel, which is the Knesset. And we have a lot of recommendations on how to strengthen the Knesset. But in addition to things that can be legislated or given budgets or enlarging the Knesset or things that make it possible for the Knesset to really monitor the executive in a variety of ways and for members of Knesset to really have their independence. Some things I say you can only embody. And one of the things that I think we need to embody when it comes to democracy and how Israel is governed is first, we cannot outsource our politics. One of the things that I think you see a lot of people after October 7th realize is that we kind of said, okay, other people will govern, we'll do high tech, we'll do this, You're saying it's a bit like the reindustrializing America movement. Outsourcing has been a massive governing idea for about 30 years in a variety of fields, from education to industry. And you're seeing that everywhere there is a kind of bring things back to the center. So a lot of the ideas, sometimes people call my sovereignty agenda hyper-mamlachtiyut, hyper Ben Gurion, kind of the idea that we bring back the nation building, the education for all, the service for all. That's how we build the solidarity, the collective, the community. So one of the things is that we understand that politics cannot be outsourced. It's ours, and we need to send our best people into that.
Would you support a participatory democracy in place of a representative democracy? Like a direct democracy model?
No, deliberative democracies are still ultimately for large populations are best, but it needs to be, our Knesset is one of the smallest in the world. We need to bring that back down the threshold. I opposed it when it was brought up in order to create more dynamism. But
we should have more smaller parties. It would be more democratic if we have more smaller parties.
It will be more dynamic. It's not, the threshold doesn't make anything more or less democratic. I'm always at pain to explain to people that, a system that is regional is not more democratic than proportional representation. There's like different systems. They're all equally democratic.
If 100,000 Israelis want to put you in Knesset, but they're not enough to put you in Knesset, that's somewhat undemocratic.
It's not undemocratic. It's less representative. I'm very precise. Like, regional systems are effectively high threshold systems. Like, they're the same as putting the threshold at 30%. They're considered democratic, representative in a different way. So I think we need to go back to more proportional representation. It was actually more dynamic. The elections were decided more on issues rather than do you manage the smaller parties best? So we paid many prices for that. But again, the thing that we can embody is the idea that it is our role to hash things out in the Knesset. And this is why when I spoke about borders, I said, look, I'm open to different formats of implementing Israeli civic law. My only condition is that you take it through the Knesset, not in any underhanded way that was never decided by the Knesset. So for me, the commitment that we all need to make is the commitment to take matters of values, different values, to the Knesset.
So just to follow up on what you asked, because I'm curious about this, and I've heard you say this before, strengthening the Knesset. It's been my understanding that for better or worse, David Ben-Gurion's government basically created the state modeled after the British system, not the American system.
Oh, definitely not the American system.
In the last couple of decades, we've had this idea that we have three branches of government.
No, modeled and designed as Congress, but in terms of it's a parliamentary system. Mm-hmm. And it's important to say...
a government that grows out of the parliament.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, because the government is by definition a majority of the parliament, my question is, how do you strengthen the parliament as a check against the government when the government is simply the majority of the parliament? That's
okay. The government is not simply the majority of the parliament. It's important to say all parliamentary systems tend to, or let me put it this way, the most successful democracies tend to be parliamentary systems. Mm-hmm. America is absolutely the exception. It has its own history and geography. Presidential systems tend to deteriorate much more easily to authoritarian systems. Successful democracies, of which Israel is one, tend to always be parliamentary systems. Parliamentary systems are where the parliament gives the government the right to govern as long as it enjoys parliamentary support. It's a very different way of saying it. It's the parliament that allows the government to govern as long as it enjoys parliamentary support, which it can remove at any point, which is why when people talk about term limits, I'm like, term limits, not relevant to parliamentary systems, because in parliamentary systems, the parliament is the term limiter every day. But how do you make a stronger parliament? What are some of the things that weakened it? First of all, again, we're small. Israel's 10 times the number of population, still the same size Knesset. So today we're one of the smallest parliaments in the world per capita. It means that we don't have members of parliament just to do parliamentary work. I was a member of 7 committees, not normal. We need to be in a position where there's one member of parliament per committee so that there's a prestige to being a member of the committee, there's a continuity, you can actually study the material and you can make life hard for the government, which right now doesn't happen so much. So make sure that members of parliament can do that. Erase completely this conditional Norwegian. The one thing that gives a member of parliament their power is that they cannot be fired. Suddenly, we find ourselves in a position where members of parliament can be fired. If they don't vote how the government wants, a minister can essentially fire them. There has been no greater degradation of the Knesset than the conditional Norwegians. That has to be completely removed. Give actual statutory powers to the Knesset to summon ministers, members of government. Right now, it's only by custom. The prime minister has to answer question time every week, not just when 40 signatures are collected. There has to be an understanding that the prime minister is the prime minister, but not some king. Yeah, it says so. He has to answer to the parliament every week with question time. These are the kinds of things that ultimately strengthen the Knesset to the government.
Okay, thank you. And with that, we'll now take questions from the audience. Can we get a show of hands?
Thank you.
At some point, my mic died. Is your mic still on?
If green means that it's on, then it's on.
Okay, so you'll be first. You can hold the mic and pass it back to me.
Sure, you can. We can share.
Okay. Well, you're going to answer questions.
Very enlightening. I appreciate it. You seem to understand the history and the politics situation. I'm curious what your position would be on forming a constitution, initiating a constitution. And I think I disagree with you slightly. I actually believe in separation of powers, and we don't have a separation between the executive and the legislative. I don't understand why the Minister of Defense is voting on legislation. Minister of Defense should run the army, not vote on legislation. Have the Prime Minister have the ability to veto laws, like the US does that. But why are ministers voting on legislation? They're supposed to be running the country, not creating laws. How would you respond to that?
We do have a separation of powers. The parliament legislates and gives the power to the executive, but it is a separate power.
It votes on the law.
Yeah, but it only is part of the parliament. The fact that they vote on the laws doesn't mean that there's no separation of powers. Ultimately, the legislation rests with the Knesset and executive power rests with the government. And all parliamentary democracies have separation of powers. And
Belgium, Norway, Holland, the ministers are not members of parliament.
no, they are.
No,
No, in Holland, we have essentially the same system as Holland, but in most parliamentary democracies, the ministers are in parliament and they vote. That does not mean that there's no separation of powers. The separation is that the executive essentially employs the laws and the legislature makes them. No, they're not the same. The fact that a minister,
voting on laws.
Yeah.
You're a legislator.
That's in his role as a member of parliament. But then as a minister, he is committed in the executive. He's not alone. He has a massive office required to operate based on the law. And as a member of parliament, he's a single member of parliament. But the executive in whole and the parliament in whole are two separate powers. That one member of parliament is also a minister in one executive office does not mean that there's no separation of power. And therefore, in all the parliamentary democracies, which again is the form of parliament most common and most successful democracies, it's based on separation of powers, but the idea that the parliament gets the power from the people and gives the executive the right to execute. But the individuals can also be part of legislation. On constitution in general, I don't think constitution is very important. You have countries without constitutions that are great countries, very democratic. You have countries with beautiful constitutions that are terrible countries. The constitutions guarantee of nothing. Also, constitutions tend to be written at very precise moments in a country's life. Liberation, end of civil war, decolonization. Israel can, if people want a constitution, I don't think it matters greatly, but if people really care about a constitution, Israel will have only one day in the future when that might happen, and that's when it has clear final borders, and it's clear who's in and who's out. Then Israel might have a moment where it can have a constitution. So I don't think it's important. I don't think it enhances or detracts from democracy, again, empirically. I am in favor, again, not fanatic, of what some people now call a thin constitution, which is just a fancy name for the basic law for legislation. Because even though Israel has basic laws and regular laws, there's no difference. Other than stamping basic law on a law, it passes the same way, it gets changed in the same way, there's no difference.
But it has more power.
No, it doesn't.
No.
It doesn't. That's the thing. That's why you have all these like arm wrestling with the judiciary when people are like, oh no, they went against the basic law. But like, you can't just stamp basic law on anything. And then there's nothing that separates basic laws and regular laws in any way other than the name.
Then why the two names?
Because there was an idea that the basic laws will once constitute a constitution, all that. But they don't actually, in practice, have a different status.
We're gonna have to use your mic for the next question.
So the basic law of legislation suggests creating a clear hierarchy that will limit, for example, judicial review of the superior laws, but will also put them through a higher ringer. Like, for example, what I support is what's called a fourth reading, meaning that it will have to pass through the next Knesset. And then you're secure that it's not something that just tries to solve your problem with guns or your problem with dairy. You're actually have two Knessets. You go to the public, you vote on it, and then it really gets elevated, and the judiciary therefore is limited in its review. I support that. That's the most I think we can and should have.
Who still has a question?
You want to give?
You said like for Palestinians, you want to do something like America did to Germany and re-educate them.
Yes.
After we do that, then what? Do they like get a state, or like what are you gonna do?
So it took me a while to be very clear that the whole discourse of yes or no Palestinian state is a Jewish discourse, which we've exported globally, but it's essentially a Jewish discourse, meaning what? Jews argue about it. Yes, Palestinian state, no Palestinian state, but there's no bride. And one of my favorite examples is Netanyahu likes occasionally to say, I prevented a Palestinian state. And every time he would say that, I would tweet that it's not nice to take credit for the one achievement that the Palestinian national movement actually has. Because actually no Israeli leader prevented a Palestinian state for the simple reason that they never wanted a state if it has to live next to a Jewish state. Even when we had a prime minister like Olmert, who did everything to try to give Palestinians a state, they didn't want it. Not if they have to agree that it lives next to a Jewish state, not if something is requested in return. So it took me a while to really clarify and phrase that it's an intra-Jewish discussion which we should stop wasting efforts on. Someone recently told me that I'm doing something very un-Jewish. I'm removing issues for Jews to argue on. But it's a stupid issue to argue on. So what I say is very simple. All I expect and need and will work is that the Palestinians will stop being organized around the destructive and negative idea of no Jewish state. Once they no longer want our negation, and they can finally express a positive vision, I have 100%, not 99.9, 100% confidence that the Jews will reach with them a mutually beneficial agreement. But what I'm saying is I don't know, they don't know, nobody knows what they want when they don't want our destruction. All I'm saying is the day they can finally express a positive vision, and I want to help them express a positive vision by removing dumping waste upstream, and then I know that we will reach an agreement with them once they can express a positive vision that is not the destruction of the Jewish state.
And you would be open to that being a one-state reality with their citizens?
I'm open to whatever we will agree on when they no longer are committed to the non-existence of a Jewish state. Again, a Jewish discourse. It's amazing how incapable we are of letting go of that intra-Jewish discourse. We're spending so much effort on it, and it becomes this political tool. Ooh, you're for a Palestinian state, you're against a Palestinian state, you're for a two-state solution, you're against a two-state solution. People, not relevant. Intra-Jewish discussion, no bride. Let's focus our domestic and international energies on ensuring that the destructive ideology is removed of fuel, and that will allow a positive vision to emerge. And again, we don't know what they want. They don't know what they want. That's their tragedy.
What if they think about what they want and they decide they want
No, we don't know. Yeah. But-
our own.
And I don't want to even speculate on that. I just want them to say something positive.
Try to keep this a little organized, guys.
One of the big things that you're suggesting, like as a through line, is that policy ought to target this upstream ideology rather than reacting to like downstream illegal acts. And while your characterization of sort of the like ideological opponents, whether they're Haredi or Palestinian, is I think at least debated. I think you're right to say like that's not really an interesting question here right now. When it comes to your view of Haredi ideology and Palestinian ideology, that an individual living under Israeli control, at least military control, who believes in these ideologies, basically a political dissident, you seem fairly happy with taking away their basic human and civil rights to disenfranchise them, right, for the Ḥaredim, like you said earlier, and maintain the disenfranchisement of Palestinians because of their ideological beliefs, because they're adversarial to the state. And that to me seems a little bit totalitarian. It reminds me personally of the Spanish Inquisition, but instead of Christianity, you ask them to convert to Zionism, flee or die. How do you plan to align your disenfranchisement strategies with international law and Israeli civic and human rights laws such that their inevitable resistance to this decisive sovereign mindset, coerced ideological conformity will not lead to your Israel engaging in the inevitable destruction in whole or in part of these national, ethnic, and religious groups?
Okay. So none of these characterizations are correct. I'm not talking, let's start with the Ḥaredi. I'm not talking about disenfranchising them. First of all, in the sense, I'm not speaking of voting rights. And that is, I think, the only disenfranchising that is relevant. But in terms of state services, I am indeed arguing that the notion of a welfare state and state services beyond voting rights is not a right. Welfare states were built on the notion that there is an element of solidarity, and that because we share an element of solidarity, we also care for each other through the state mechanisms. And we see it all over the world. If the notion of solidarity begins to erode for a variety of reasons, in some countries it's immigration and not assimilation, then you see that the welfare state begins to erode as well. So I'm saying the opposite. The invitation is completely open. Everyone is invited to serve the country and support it and serve the people. But if you say, I don't wish to support and serve this country, then you are, as an adult, removing yourselves from the mechanisms of solidarity, which again, you can fix at any point. So I'm treating you as an adult who can choose to fix it, who can choose to serve your country when you realize that getting things from the country also means giving to it and contributing to it. And that a small, crowded, and fighting country like Israel cannot live with a vision that people have that they can only take and not give. And the numbers are insane in terms of how disproportionate it is. But I'm proposing something that is as equal and as by law. I went to some very senior legal people, and they said, actually, Einat, you're breaking into an empty door, because this is the de jure legal situation now. One of the greatest achievements of this government domestically is that for the first time in years, there's no law that basically allows people to not serve. We are back to the 1950s law, which is a general law that says that everyone essentially has to serve. And so this is the actual legal situation. I offer something that is entirely equal, entirely open, gives people the individual ability to serve their country in a way that fits their ability. And if they refuse, they know the consequences, but they do it as adults, and they can always fix those consequences. Someone, the legal scholar said that there's a term legally that says the keys to the prison are in your hands. They use it for people who refuse to give women get. They tell them, look, the keys to the prison are in your hands. Give her a get and you're out. In the same way, I treat them as adults, not as toddlers. This is what the state of Israel needs. It needs people to serve and defend. You're invited in. We're going to find a way for you to serve. But if you refuse, those are the consequences. There's no taking without giving. Very simple. But I'm not about disenfranchising from voting rights.
Okay,
Is it-
but if you play this out, right? If you have, for example, a Ḥaredi family,
Yes.
right, and they say we refuse to serve in the military, right, and we under
And in
law,
agriculture and in healthcare, and no way. Yes.
we don't want to
This
be
is
part of
yours,
this.
not ours. Absolutely.
But then they are surrounded by a state that enforces their laws upon it. That sure, if they break any of those laws, they can be taken to a court and they can be tried and punished. And as a result, if they say no, I don't want to be part of this, I don't want my labor to be coerced to be part of this state because I'm ideologically opposed to it. But also, you're saying that if they don't have the financial means to, within the context of this state, procure enough money for food, that then because they don't have access to social services, that they should starve.
No, they should serve their country.
Right, so that's slavery.
No, everything is like there is again, the country doesn't owe people everything if they feel that they owe it nothing. We have come to live in such a perverse world that people feel that it is their right to receive while they refuse to give. And yes, I think that this has to change, while always telling people you have every right to receive when you give. Yes, you want to be like the Satmars, who say we are completely removing ourselves. Fine. I think they're not starving, but they have developed an ideological view that I can respect, that says we reject the Zionist state, we will give nothing, but we will also take nothing. That I can respect. But the notion that people say it should give us even when we refuse to defend, to serve, yeah, I admit that I don't accept it, and I think it would be unacceptable everywhere that needs that.
These are communities that gave Israel like their support to exist and rule over them, even though they predated Israel's existence on the land.
But
as in the Haredi communities here before they stopped from the state.
fine. So, as I'm saying, they have developed a worldview and communities that I can respect that says we get nothing, we give nothing. There's a reason they're so small and marginal, because when your worldview is we get nothing and we receive nothing, and you depend on two pritzim who don't like each other and they give you money, then fine, then you can sustain your small community in kind of opposition to the state. But it's a coherent worldview that I can respect. You give nothing, you get nothing. What I cannot respect is people who expect to get without giving. That absolutely. In terms of the Arabs, yes, I think ultimately a serious long-term country brings them into the fold, educates them to the dominant language, to the holidays, to the flag. I think, again, this should be normal and basic. We've developed such bizarre notions that we think that it's normal for a country to fund and enable education that is against it. And I think we're doing no one any favor by enabling that. So education for all in the Hebrew language, the national holidays, the Israeli flag, I don't see why that's a problem. That is normal.
Are they allowed to opt out like software?
Opt out in what way?
They don't want any state involvement in their communities. They want to be doing things on their own.
Not give and not take and have education. Look, when it comes in terms of not give and not take, of course, I'm saying,
They do their own education.
okay, I'm separating for a moment education from service. The service to the state, yes, it's equal for all. The invitation is open to all. The service is equal to all. And the consequences are equal to all. Absolutely. In terms of education, here I admit I'm a little more stringent, because I think the state of Israel cannot afford, certainly not en masse, maybe in small measures at the margin, large communities that are educated against the state. Yes, I think that is something that I tend to be less lax about.
I'm not sure it's still on. Oh, it
Green
is.
is
Okay,
on,
yeah, green is
yeah.
on. Okay. You two, yeah, you're gonna have to take the mic.
Yeah, thank you for educating us about how a lot of stuff about how the government works. A lot of that I didn't know. But about the Haredi issue, like about the legal sanctions that you want to apply to the Haredim, a lot of people talk about that kind of thing, but just on a very technical level, like I'm not sure how that works, because both the left and the right usually require the Haredim to build a coalition. So why would the Haredim, who are part of a coalition, allow sanctions against them to be created? So how I think Bennett and Lapid created the coalition without Haredim, but I don't recall that they placed any sanctions against him. So I don't know how you do that.
He is talking about it now. Yeah, I'll explain what, first of all, what changed and what it means. So quite a few people ask, there were ideas in the past, or there were coalitions without Haredi parties in the past. What's different now? The answer is very simple. October 7th. If you look historically, societies are transformed by wars. Wars accelerate processes. Wars expose situations. And my favorite example is, after World War I, women, you had to give women the votes. What changed? They fought for voting rights before. The war accelerated a process that resulted in giving women the vote. And you can see it throughout history. Wars accelerate processes. There was a worldview among some groups that assumed that, okay, the Haredis are studying, but fundamentally, if Israel will be in a moment of existential need and all that, they will mobilize. When it was very clear that not only are they not mobilizing, and even the mythology about the 3,000 on that day turns out to be, I just learned, completely wrong. Not only did they not mobilize for fighting, for the front, and I remember at the time people saying, it's going to be a short war, it's no use trying to train them. They could have now ended a 3-year service. So they didn't go to the front, they didn't go to the hospitals, they didn't go to the shikun. There was no mobilization, that's on one side, and their representatives and the field spent the years after trying to secure privileges not to serve. That's something that you don't come back from. Okay, but the coalitions were done under conditions where people thought that it was not an important issue. They were not willing to put political capital. The fury and anger of Israelis now on this issue is such that you're even seeing now that a government that wants to give them everything, and apropos, you talked about the coalitions and you compared a bit thinking about Palestinianism and perverse incentives. Someone recently gave a talk and she sounded like the way I talk about my journey on the Palestinian ideology. She spoke on the Haredi. She said, I spent my life trying to bring them in. Processes, slowly, hachala, doing it together, in agreement. She said, after October 7th, we barely are beginning to process the horror. She's sitting in a meeting of government ministers. She's there as a kind of a person working on it. And one of the Haredi ministers says, the Haredis are the big losers and sufferers of October 7th. And what he meant later by it is that now Bibi will not be able to give them everything that they achieved in the coalition negotiation, because clearly it will be more difficult budget-wise and in terms of where the Israeli public is. But being as part of this learning, so she basically said, that's the moment that I realized there's no partner. We had, the same thing that people realized with Palestinians. The same thing, I heard Yuli Edelstein give a talk about trying to negotiate a law for their drafting. He said, only one person told me the truth. He said, I believe that it's important to reach an agreement, that it's good that they're there in the coalition. I can bring them into the fold. I can balance between various needs. He believed that genuinely. And he said, only one person kept on telling me, the advisor to the rabbi of Gur. He said, he told me, Yuli, they're all stringing you along. When the time comes to sign, there will be no one to be found, which again is also the Palestinian story. Negotiate. When you actually need to sign, you're ending your war against the Jewish state. You can get your own state, but it will have to live next to a Jewish state. They're nowhere to be found. So he also has this realization where he says the October 6th mindset that governed so many coalitions, that will give the Haredis what we want. Gantz gives them a blank check. That's gone. The people of Israel are mostly not there. So I've met Haredis in the last few weeks who said, the left will want to get rid of Bibi. They'll give us everything we need. We'll get it for them. We don't even need to get things from Netanyahu because we'll get more from the left. And I'm like, you really don't understand how much Israeli society has been changed in the last 3 years. You don't understand how angry people are. So wars change societies, and this is why all the assumptions that were true before October 7th, I don't think are as valid right now.
Okay, final question. Would you like to ask?
So first of all, somebody who lives in the diaspora, I really, your voice became so important after the war, and gave me a lot of strength to become a better advocate and to feel the depth of my connection to Israel. So you landed. And my question is, you said that 70% of the war is the information war, which yes, I feel intensely. So I wanted to hear what your thoughts are about how do we solve that.
So it's beautiful that the question is coming from you and your story, because for us party, this has been our dominant English week. I do Chugei Bait meetings every evening. Typically one a week, even two a week, are for people who speak English in Israel. But this week has been every day. Sunday Ra'anana, Monday Beersheba, Tuesday Netanya, Wednesday here. And because I realized that my calendar was with internationally minded Israelis this full week, I highlighted even more than usual the notion of the information consciousness narrative war. And I also highlighted more than usual the role of internationally minded Israelis in understanding how crucial and existential the war is. One of the greatest successes of Zionism is that Israelis don't get it. Israelis are so insulated, essentially, from the world that they hear that muffled. They don't get it. They don't get it as acutely as Israelis who made Aliyah, who have family and colleagues and work abroad, and they meet it without the muffling part of the state of Israel. And this is where I think internationally minded Israelis are a unique position to serve in the role of sentries in Game of Thrones who say, winter's coming. All of the things you Israelis think you have, military, economy, those things, if they don't rest on the ability of Israel to manage itself in the world, to understand the arena in which wars are fought right now, where wars are decided more by the information and narrative than by the bravery of your soldiers and the innovation of your weapons, we essentially risk all our military achievements if we lose the other war, which in many ways we are. What do we do? First, understand that it's an arena, and the more important arena. Right now, that's not how we behave. We behave like there's military, everything is military. I think I've emphasized it enough today, how much we think just downstream military. We don't devote resources. We don't devote people. We just don't. We have amazing people. We can put tomorrow 100 articulate Israelis speaking in all languages who know our story. We're not even doing that. Our Ministry of Foreign Affairs is a dangling afterthought of our the defense ministry. So first of all, it's not even on the same level. It's not like that we have a Rubio and Hegseth and you know that they are essentially on par in policy making. We have military, and then, okay, you, Minister of Foreign Affairs, go explain what we said. No. What we need, that kind of thinking, and that's in many ways why I'm standing for election and why I'm especially appealing to internationally minded Israelis. We need that kind of thinking at the adult table that understands that if we define the war badly, we're going to lose it. If we're going to tell people that it's just Hamas and everything else is fine, then we've already lost information war, because then the story is bad Hamas, good everybody else. That you don't talk about the ideology. So first is we need to have policy making at that level. We need to have complete clarity on what we're fighting and what our goals are. We need to be able to convey and embody the positive vision, constructive Arabs, Zionist Arabs, with the harsh steps that are necessary to achieve it, and always put it together, always twin them together. The resources and the two strongest messages that we have. People always say, oh, we need to explain things very complicated. I'm like, we have two simple messages that have the benefit of being true and have the benefit of having our allies agree, that having the Palestinians be our allies on that. The first is the entire conflict has always been an Arab, and some would say even Islamic, assault on Jewish sovereignty. It's never been anything else. The Jews want a state, the Arabs want the Jews not to have a state. To the credit of the Palestinian Arabs and their supporters, they say that too. But somehow we never, and that's missing the sunny vision, we never force them to admit that. That's the other reason I'm angry when Netanyahu says, I prevented a Palestinian state. I'm like, I'm happy that it makes your base happy. That's stupid too. But then I meet it when I go around and I say, look, this is the conflict. The Jews want a state. The Arabs want the Jews not to have a state. They're like, but your prime minister just admitted that he's the problem. So what do you want from us? So that kind of understanding of where the war is fought means everything. It means that we have ministers, that we need people who understand the weight of words when you are a minister in the Jewish state. We need adults at the table. And so message one, this is a conflict. Use the Palestinians to make our point, hammer it all the time, pursue policies that force them to reveal that this is what it's all about. And the second one is, if you're a Trumpist, I call it anti-Zionism. It's for losers. If you're not a Trumpist, I call it anti-Zionism is the ideology of failed societies. But we need to help our allies understand that all these words, apartheid, racism, genocide, they're not real words. They're synonyms for evil that are used to create a global mindset by which the world would be a better place if Israel, Zionism, the collective Jew would be erased. And we need to be able to alert them that this is what's going on. Again, how many of our leaders are able to meet with allies and convey to them? Anti-Zionism is an ideology of failed societies. If it builds up in your society, everyone's in danger, not just the Jews. Societies that have allowed this ideology to govern have ultimately self-destroyed. It's really simple messages. There's a lot of policies that emerge from them to put the resources behind them. Know your enemies. I spoke about Qatar. If you understand that it's an enemy, you don't just enter the defeatist attitude of they're rich, there's nothing to do. You understand that they're soft spot is their prestige and image. You attack them where they care, not where you care. You don't give them the free gift of being a respectable mediator. You understand where the war is fought, what they care about, how to go to their soft spots. It's a kind of thinking and discipline that I developed. And again, one of the reasons I'm running is that I don't see that thinking anywhere, all across the political spectrum.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.